Okay, here's Emma's delivery story. I did not labor at all because I had a planned C-section. About 2 weeks before I delivered, I had been having about 2.5 weeks before I had been having contractions straight for like 8 to 10 minutes each, and they were hard contractions, and they go all day, and I was up to 4 centimeters dilated, and they never told me how effaced I was, but they said I was very, very soft. So whatever that means, I don't know. The doctors don't always tell you everything. So but we scheduled a C-section for the 27th. My due date was the 26th of September. So we scheduled a C-section at 1 o'clock. We did that because I had gestational diabetes, and we didn't, so we wanted to keep that under control. Also, I have history of delivering large babies, and so my doctor didn't want this one to get too large, and I'd just have to go do labor and then end up doing another C-section. So also I can't remember another reason. Sorry, I'm really foggy right now. Another reason is, I think just my doctor said, you can't go past your due date. We're giving you a C-section. So, because I've had another C-section beforehand, and I ended up having a lot of complications with the labor, so she didn't feel comfortable with me going into labor again. So I went into the hospital around 11 o'clock, and the nurse came out, and she said, "Why are you here? Didn't you get my phone message?" Apparently she had called me and left a message saying not to come in till 2. So there we were sitting, and we ended up sitting in the waiting room until about 12:30. Then they finally brought us in. I checked in, I filled out the forms, and then we went into the room where they check women to see if they're truly in labor or not. So we went into that room, and then they hooked me. Sorry. They hooked me up into all the monitors to check on the baby's heartbeat and my contraction, and then I got to see my contractions going, which didn't mean anything because I wasn't going into labor or anything, but it was fun to watch. And we sat there and sat there and sat there forever. We sat there until about 2 o'clock. So we were sat there for another hour and a half before anyone came in and started doing anything. Finally, at about 2, the nurse came in and said there's an emergency C-section, and so we had to wait for them. There's another C-section that's scheduled before you, so we have to wait for them, and then you're it. I said, okay, no problem. So then we waited. She started getting all my information, putting it into the computer. They had to test my blood levels for the gestational diabetes, and they actually were surprised because I was low. And you can't eat 8 hours before the C-section. Well, I hadn't eaten since the night before, and then I hadn't eaten. I had to keep waiting because they kept pushing it back. So I'm like, of course my blood sugars are low. I haven't eaten anything like forever. So and then I wasn't testy or saying anything like that, but that's what I was thinking. And then so then she hooked me up to an IV. I asked her to wait as long as possible, so she did, and asked all the questions about, do you feel safe at home, and blah 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 blah, just questions like that. And then she hooked me up to an IV. The doctors came in, and one doctor came in, introduced themselves, and then the anesthesiologist came in and introduced himself, asked me questions, inputted stuff into the computer, And then they gave me this awful, awful drink, which apparently I had taken before with Andrew too, but I don't remember because I was so out of it. This time I'm aware. It's this drink so that just in case, sometimes when you go ahead and have a C-section, people vomit. So they give you an antacid so that you won't vomit or have nausea or anything like that. But so I took it and it's so bitter. I was like gagging on it. And you have to take, the glasses are about this big. You have to take 2 of them. So, so I had that, and then finally, the emergency section was done. The planned C-section was done. Then the nurse says, oh, the doctors are in a meeting. So then we had to wait around even longer. So finally at 4:30, we got into the actual room. And so we got into the room, and David, my husband, had to wait outside while they were prepping me. And so he had all of his gowns on. I was in the room, and the anesthesiologist, he put I had a spinal done, so I bent over, I'm laying on my side, I bent over as much as I can. He puts the needle in, which doesn't hurt me at all. I'm pretty good with that kind of stuff. And, I started feeling all the burning and numbing, and he takes a toothpick and he rubs my arm. He says, feel how sharp this is? I said, yeah. He starts going up my side and says, tell me when you feel the same sharpness. So I did. I told him. And he did a cold wipe, and he did the same thing to my side, and just to check to make sure I was numb. And he only numbed me to the bottom of my ribs, my lungs, which was so nice, because with Andrew, they numbed me up to my neck. And you can't even feel yourself breathe, but you're talking, so you're breathing. But this time they only numbed me like to the bottom of my ribs, and so it was wonderful. Feeling came back this time around so much faster. It took actually no, it took longer for me to feel my legs again. It took me about 8 hours. No. It took me about 6 hours to feel my feet and feel my legs again. So yeah, that was fun. But while I'm during the delivery, the nurse was setting up all the equipment, and she kept putting the blue tarp on my face, and the anesthesiologist pushed it off. And then she kept pushing it down, and finally said, look, you have a patient under here, and you're putting this on her face. You need to stop. She goes, oh, sorry, I'm trying to make the equipment look pretty. I not pay attention. He said, well, you better pay attention. Her face is under there. And I was like, thank you, so that made me kind of nervous. Well, then the other doctor came in. I hadn't met him yet. So the doctors came in. They all said, there were only 2 of them in there the whole time, along with the anesthesiologist and then my nurse. And then the doctors were all male, and they said, hi, I'm so-and-so, we're here to deliver. And then they just started. And they said, hey, where's the pediatrician? And I was like, you're doing this and there's no pediatrician here? And so they ended up having, the pediatrician wasn't able to be there for some reason because of a meeting or something. So they grabbed a midwife, and the midwife came in, and right when they pulled Emma out, the midwife came in. So then they handed her over, and she was crying, and I could hear her crying, and it actually took me a while to really connect with Emma. It wasn't until like later that night that I really looked at Emma and said, oh, you're mine, and I love you. But the first thought when I saw her, honestly, was I looked at her and I said, you're really, I thought, ew, go get cleaned out. That's the first thing I thought, which is so different from Andrew. I fell in love with him the first time, and I saw her and I was like, oh, that's her, yay, she's finally here, okay. are you going to finish sewing me up now? Like, those were my thoughts, and I felt horrible for feeling them, and, you know, started to feel, like, depressed that I was feeling this way. But later that night, about, you know, 8-10 hours later, it was totally changed. So they handed her to me, and then I got to take a couple pictures, and they took her away to get her cleaned up, and they finished sewing me up, and the doctor said, good thing that we found that you had a C-section. If you had gone into labor, then you would have erupted. They could see straight through my uterus. They called it the window, and my uterus is so weak that I would have erupted, and some awful things would have happened. So you know, God just knew. He had His hand. He planned it all, you know, and so I'm very thankful that I had a C-section, and so then I went into the recovery room just for postpartum, right after a C-section. No family, nothing is allowed except for David and the baby and the nurses, and I had a really hard time. I started feeling really nauseous. I didn't puke, but I was like this close to puking. I was so shaky from the spinal, which I never had any problems the first time around. But this time I was shaky, and I started having blood clots, and so I started getting faint, and I was gonna faint, except that I called out to the nurse. I said, I'm gonna faint. You know, I said, I'm feeling really dizzy, and she came over immediately and started pushing on my stomach and pushing all the blood clots out, and so they took care of it. They gave me Pitocin so that it would stop the bleeding as much and clear all the blood clots out, and it wasn't working. So then she put medicine. She stabbed me she put medicine in my side. She stabbed me is what I say, but she put it in my side, you know, and that ended up stopping it. She said, if it doesn't work, we have one more thing. So anyway, this is getting really long. So then finally we got into the real recovery room, and you know, just my parents came, or my dad came, my aunt, and David's parents were there, and that was it. It was perfect. I didn't have visitors except for them, and that's all I wanted there. No one started really no one's really coming until, you know, we say we're ready, and we've had some visitors come, and it's been wonderful, you know, to see them. So I've been super emotional. Like, my hormones are going crazy. I've just been crying like crazy over anything, especially after the delivery. Like, that night, I would just start crying just for any reason. Andrew came in, and he saw Emma in her bed, and he's so cute. He just sat there and laughed hysterically and just touched her so gently, and he goes, for the first time, he goes, baby, baby, baby. So he knew. He's like, that's a baby. And I don't know if he realized that that's his baby sister coming home, but he knew that was a baby, and he was so gentle and he just loved her, and he's been like that ever since. He's been getting a little jealous, but he's been looking at her and just touching her so softly, and it's been so wonderful. So that's my delivery story, and if we decide to have any more kids, then we're not even thinking about it or talking about it right now. So, but if we decide to, then it's a for sure C-section next time because of my uterus being so thin, and it'll be earlier. They don't want me to go to term, and I have to do an amniocentesis, but that's for another time to talk about if I get pregnant again. So, talk to you all later. Bye.